Welcome to 16 weeks of SAT and our second percentages video. So this video is all about those more complex percentages. So when we're maybe looking to find a 27%, a 36%, maybe a 2%, maybe a 98%. So there's all these different variations that are a little bit more complex, and they need us to think about which strategy we're going to apply to get there. Now, last week's video talked about all those combinations of 10 and 20, 30, 40, 60% plus 5%. So we could find those by doubling, by timesing by 3 or 4, and halving and adding those together. Very, very simple strategy. Now today we might need to find some slightly different strategies to find 27%, for example. So I'm going to show you the long method of finding it, which is going to involve, so for example, if it was 27%, we would need to find 10% and double it. We would need to find 5% and add it, and we'd need to find 1% and add it again, okay, to find that combination of 27%. Or there is a longer strategy that we can use that's going to take a little bit less time, but we need to be confident with multiplication, long multiplication, and we need to be confident with division in terms of place value divided by 100. So if we can do those strategies, the more complex percentages, we can solve them quite quickly with some of the strategies that we'll get into in the video, or we can find those combinational approaches, which I'm going to take you through. So thanks for getting involved with the series. As I always ask, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, as it really helps us produce more videos. And like I said, this week's video is all about those more complex percentages that we need to find. So let's get stuck straight into the content and work out how we solve these problems. So the first thing that we need to do today in regards to starting to find these more complex percentages is to be able to find 1%. So I'll just highlight this off here. Finding 1% is really important. A little bit like last week. If you haven't seen last week's video, go and check that out. It's really important that you can find 10% and 5% and then multiply that to find 20s, 30s, 40s. And it's the same with 1%. We need to find 1% so that we can find 2%. Change to a pen, so that we can find 2%, 3%, and 4%, and other smaller percents. So being able to find 1% is really important, and it's really straightforward. So, like with finding 10%, 10% is just dividing by 10. Finding 1% is just dividing by 100. So we can do that using place value using these examples. So if we look at 36 and we think, right, to find 1%, I need to divide by 100. Which place value is moving everything 2 spaces to the right along the place value spectrum. So if we've got 36, we would just go decimal, decimal, and move everything, divide by 10, divide by 10, okay? So the 3, we're going to move 2 columns to the right, all right? So the 3 would go 1 column, we skip the decimal, so the 3 is going to end up in this column, and the 6 is going to end up here, all right? So we would have 0.36, so that's 0.36. So that is what 1% of 36 is. If we were to do that to 72 over here, went right, okay, we've got 72, we're going to divide that by 100. So decimal, decimal, everything's going to move 2 spaces to the right of 2 columns. So that's 1, 2. So that's divide by 10. So that would be 10%, divide by 100. When now this is what 1% is. So the 7 is going to go here, and then logically the 2 goes next to it, keeping the same structure. Okay, there's no 1s, so we've got 0.72. Again, if we were to do 145, just put a decimal after the 1, okay, and then everything's going to move 2 spaces to the right. So again, start with probably the largest digit. This is going to go 1, 2. So the 1 is going to end up here, the 4 is going to end up here, and the 5 is going to end up here. So we would have 1.45. Fantastic. And then again with 630. Got 630. We're going to put our 2 decimals in to find 1%. Everything's going to move 2 spaces. So the 6 is going to go 1, 2, and then everything is going to follow on after it. So we've got 6.30. Now, although we've moved right to the corner of the page, that process is very, very simple. Very simple to find 1%. We just divide by 100. And if we've got to use this little strategy of putting the decimals in after the 1 and then moving everything however far we need to do it. We did that with 10%. So 36 here, if we were finding 10%, everything would have moved one space. So that would have ended up as 3.6. I know that looks a bit messy, but that illustrates what we're doing. 10%, we move everything to the right one space. To find 1%, we move everything two spaces because we need to divide by 100. So that's how we find 1%, okay? So again, we can look now at finding 1% too. How do we find those multiples? So it's exactly the same as 10% and then getting 30%. If we've got 10% and we want to find 30%, we find 10% and times by 3 to get 30%. It's the same with 1%. If we can find 1%, then we can find 2% by doubling it. We can find 3% by timesing by 3. We can find 4% by timesing by 4. So it's fairly straightforward. And my biggest tip is to make little notes as we go. All right. So straight away, if we were going to find 1%, if I needed to find 1% of 60, hopefully I would know what that is. But if not, we've got our decimal. Everything's going to move two spaces. So that's 1, 2. So I've got 0.6. Now, most children will, this 0 here, will put that there. But you don't need to do that because 0.60 is just the same as 0.6. So we know that 1% is equal to 0.6, all right, or 0.6. So then again, that's very straightforward from there. We can just double to find our next one. So we would know that 2% is just double 0.6, which is 1.2, isn't it? And then 3% is just a case of adding another 0.6 on. So 1.2 add 0.6 would be 1.8. And then 4% adding another 0.6 on would be 2.4. Now again, if we've got 0.6 here, if we just highlight this off here, and we look and think, oh, I don't know how to add 0.6 on. Well, we just look, 0.6, just think of your 6 times table. Because if we look here, we've got 6. Essentially, we've got 12 here, 1.2, 1.8, 18, 2.4, 14. So we can add 0.6 on by using our knowledge of multiples of 6. It doesn't need to be that difficult. After that, let's take a look at, so we've worked out there really easily, 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%. So that's going to help us when we're finding 24% or 23%, because we can find 20%, but how do we find the 3% or the 4%? Well, this is how we do it, all right? And this can be applied anywhere. So let's have a look at 480. How do we find those 1s, 2s, and 3s? So again, we know that 480, let's find 1% first. So decimal, everything's going to move along 2 places. So we'll start with the 4. That's going to go 1, 2. So the 4 is going to be in this column. So we've got 4.8. And we have ended up with that decimal situation again. So we know that 1% is equal to 4.8. So 2% is going to be equal to 9.6. Okay. And again, if at this point, if you were struggling to go, right, well, what's 9.6 add 4.8? There's nothing really quickly stopping you from doing a column addition somewhere. I know I've not got much space, but you could do 9.6, add 4.8, very quickly do a column addition. 6 add 8 is 14, carry the 1, 9 add 4 is 13, add the 1 is 14. So we've got 14.4. So we've got 3% is 14.4. And then again, you might want to do another column addition, or you might just be able to see that we've got 4%. 14 add 4 is 18.4. Add the 0.8 is going to be 19.2. So this 19.2 here is probably, these 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, these probably as complicated as you're going to get. You're not going to get much more complicated than that. So if you can practice finding 1% and then your 2, 3, and 4% of these types of numbers, it's very, very straightforward. Now, obviously, if you had a number like 700 and you wanted to find 1%, then it's just 7, isn't it? So if we get them whole numbers, it's really, really easy to work with. But remember, the key to finding 2, 3, and 4% is to finding 1% and then just adding on another load of it so that we can find that value really, really simply. Now, with each of these videos from now on, so we've looked at how we find 1, 2, 3, 4%. We're going to dip back into some of last week's content because we're going to need to be able to find 30% and 6%. With each of these question types, I'm going to show you the broken down version, so how we find each individual part. And then I'm also going to show you the short version as well. So that's going to look at how we do a multiplication and we divide by 100 to get to the answer. And then from there, you can decide which way you feel more comfortable, okay? The short method is very useful, but we don't just want to use that blindly in every instance. In most instances, we can, but in some instances, it might be quicker to just find 10% and 1% and add them together. Going through a whole long multiplication and then dividing by 100 potentially has room for mistakes, but that's for you to decide. So let's have a little bit of a look at this. So to start with, if we were going to find 36% of a number, the first thing to think is, what is 36% made up of in terms of what we can find? So I would be thinking this is made up of 30%, get the right pen color, 30%, 5%, and then 1%, because I can find all of those relatively easy. All right. To start with, I'm going to need to find 10%, to find 30 and 5, and then I can find 1% and add it on. So let's take a look at how we do that. So again, we're just going to work generally in the space and try to be as neat as we can to get to the answer. So first of all, I would be looking to find 10%. So I would do that by having 240 decimal. I would move everything one space to the right, so that we're going to take one jump. That's going to leave the 2 here, the 4 here, and the 0 here. All right. So I know straight away that essentially 10% is 24. All right. So then if I know 10% is 24, I can times 24 by 3 to get 30%. So again, we're going to do that. If we had a bit more space, we would do this properly. So I'm going to do 24 times 3. You guys would obviously use the squares on your paper. I'm just doing this way so we can just... 3 times 4 is 12. Carry the 1. And then 3 times 2 is 6. Add the 1 is 7. So we've got 72. So I'm going to make a note of that 30% is equal to 72, because I'm going to need that in a minute. So now I need to find 5%. So if I know that 10% is 24, then if I half that, that'll give me 5%. So I know half of 24 is 12. So again, I'm going to make a little note that 5% is equal to 12. Brilliant. Now I just need to find 1%. So again, if we know that 240, let's go move over here, 240, just going to rub that out because I really want you to see the place value of this. If we know that 240, move it 2 spaces to the right, so divide by 10, so that's 100. The 2 is going to end up here, and the 4 is going to end up here. So we know that 1% is equal to 2.4. So now, if we go back to the top, I've got my 30% here, I've got my 5% here, and I've got my 1% here. So I can just add them all up. So to start with, I would just do 72 add 12. So I'd make a note of that. 72 add 12. I know that that is equal to 84. And then I'm going to do 84 add 2.4. And in my head, I can do that no problem at all. That's going to be 86.4. All right. So again, there's a lot of work involved in that. But mathematically, it is important for you to be able to manipulate percentages and calculate these as we go. So know how you find 10%, know how you find 1% and 5% and 3%, because that's a really, really useful skill. So we've got to the answer. Now, some might argue that's taken us a long time to get there. I'm doing a lot of explaining in there. I think if I was to do that on my own without needing to explain, I would probably be able to do that in less than 30 seconds by just quickly making notes. All right. So let's have a look at the other strategy. So exactly the same question, but all we're going to do is a long multiplication, and then we're going to divide by 100. So let's just do it. All right. So I'm just going to drop a ruler line in just to help me lay this out. There we go. Okay. I'm going to place my placeholder 0 in as well. So then I'm going to do 240 times 36. And again, this all comes down to what you feel comfortable doing. You might have looked at the last slide and thought, I can find those percentages really easily and I'm good at adding, so I'll do that. You might not be very good at long multiplication and it causes you problems, so you're going to stay away from this strategy. On the other hand, you might be very good at long multiplication and can just do it very, very easily. Okay, then I would suggest that you probably use this strategy. So 6 times 0, so we're going to do 6 times 0, 6 times 4, 6 times 2. All right, so 6 times 0 is 0, 6 times 4 is 24, carry the 2. 6 times 2 is 12, add the 2 is 14. Then we're multiplying by 10. So we've got our placeholder 0. We're going to do 3 times 4, 3 times 0, 3 times 4, 3 times 2. So 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 4 is 12, carry the 1. 3 times 2 is 6, add the 1 is 7. So there we get to that very, very simply. And then we're going to add them up, aren't we? So we've got 0 add 0, 4 add 2 is 6, and then 1 and 7 is 8. So straight away we can see this number coming together. This number now, we need to divide by 100. So we would do, I'm going to run out of space, so I'm just going to sort of do it here in red so we can see it. So we've got 8, 6, 4, 0, decimal, decimal, and the same principle. Everything's going to move 2 spaces to the right. So ideally work with the first digit, 1, 2. So the 8 is going to be in this column, and then everything is going to follow on. All right. So the 8 would end up here. Then it's the 6. Then it's the 4. Then it's the 0. Okay. So essentially we get to the same answer that we did before, which is 86.4. And again, that is, if you can do this, simply, and then you can do this, then yes, it is essentially, for me, much more straightforward. But again, in terms of time, probably taking 30 seconds to a minute in that sort of area to do this. You'll only get in your SATs one of these questions, maybe 2, because they're aware they will take you a little bit more time to calculate. All right. So again, get used to being able to do both, but then obviously in the SATs, do the one that makes it more comfortable. But the reason why we talk about this is because, for example, if I just write a few numbers down, if you were to do this strategy, great. That's great that you can do it. But if you, for instance, got 99% of a number and then you had to do 99 times 420, that's quite difficult. Whereas if you can just realize that 99%, if you can just find 1% and take it away, that's much easier, isn't it? So there's always options. There's always that versatile approach that we need to be able to attack that. And I'll show you some examples of this shortly. Let's have a look at another question. So again, 72%. Again, if I look at 72, I'm looking at it and thinking that is made up of 70% and 2%. All right. So in order to find that, I'm going to need to find 10% and times by 7. And I'm going to need to find 1%. And I'm going to need to times it by 2. That's going to give me 72%. So let's just get in and do that. Now with 480, we can probably hopefully see that 10% is 48. But if you can't see that, let's just go through the process. So we've got 480, decimal, decimal. Divide by 10 is move everything 1 space to the right. So that's going to end up like this, 48.0. So that is 48. So 10% is equal to 48. So in order to find 70%, I need to times 48 by 7. So I'm just going to do this down here short. So 48 times 7. You would have a lot more space than I do, so you'd be absolutely using the squares on your squared paper. So 7 times 8 is 56. Carry the 5. And then 7 times 4 is 28. Add the 5 is 33. Okay? So we end up with 336. So now we've got 70%. Again, we'll make a little note of that down here. So 70%. So I know what my 70% is. I just need to find my 2%. So again, if we've got 480, I can make a little note here. So we've got 480, decimal, decimal. We need to move everything 2 spaces. So that's going to be 1, 2. So the 4 is going to end up here. So we've got 4.8. And again, we don't need to do anything drastic here. We can double 4.8 quite easily, I would hope, and know that, well, double 4 is 8, and double 0.8 is 1.6. So we've got 9.6. And I just need to add that on to 336. Again, this is where it gets slightly, again, a little bit complicated. If you needed to do a column addition because you couldn't add that up, I'm just going to change my color just to differentiate. 336.0 add 9.6. Now, this might be a position that you need to get yourself into to be able to correctly answer this problem. So again, it's an addition, and at this point, for some of you, this would be really easy because you're comfortable here. That's going to be 15, carry the 1, 3 add 1 is 4, and then the 3 just drops down. So we get 345.6. So let's just transfer that over, 345.6, and let's see if we get the same answer. So we're going to go straight into a grid method for long multiplication. So we're going to leave ourselves 2 rows, and we're going to drop in our placeholder 0 straight away. We're going to do 480 times 72. So we're going to do 2 times 0, 2 times 8, 2 times 4 to start with. So 2 times 0 is 0, 2 times 8 is 16, carry the 1, 2 times 4 is 8, add the 1 is 9. Then we're going to do 7 times 0, 0, 8 times 7 is 56, carry the 5, and then 7 times 4 is 28, add the 5 is 33. Okay. So again, we're then going to add those up. And you can see straight away, look, the 2 parts that we had in the previous question, which was 9.6, and then which when divided by 100 will be, and then we've got the 336, which from the previous question, you can see those from it. But again, we're just going to add them up now. So we know that this is going to be right and the same. This is going to be 6, going to be 15, carry the 1. We've got 4 and the 3. So again, 345.60. Going to run out of space, which is fine. We'll get away with it this time. So the 3 is going to end up here, the 4 is going to end up here, the 5 is going to end up here, and the 6 is going to end up here. If there was another square, there would be a 0, but that placeholder 0 out there doesn't matter. So the answer, look, if we link this here and just look straight above, we get exactly the same answer. I've just run out of a little bit of space to present it differently, but essentially by using the long multiplication and then dividing by 100, we can get the answer really quickly and get to the same goal. But as I would argue, I think having the skill of finding 10 for 72%, remember, being able to find 70% and finding 2%, still having that skill is really important, okay? To be able to do that, to find 10%, to find 1%, do the multiplications, and use your mental arithmetic to get to the answer, that skill is important. So don't just think, I'll do this and this. You can do that, but why not have both skills and choose which one you want to use? Okay, so again, we'll dive into this one. So again, I see 46%, and I see 40%, I see 5%, and I see 1%, because they're the things that I can make. I can't make 6% without 5% and 1%, right? So it's much, well, I could find 1% and times it by 6. That's absolutely fine. But I think it's easier to find 5% and 1%. So let's just go ahead and do it. So we need to find 10% of 360. I'm just going to use a little bit of mental arithmetic. I know that 10% is 36. So that means I know that 5% is 18. So I've done that quite quickly, and I know a lot of you will be able to do that. If I know that 10% is 36, then I know that 1% is 3.6. So quite quickly, this is where this strategy becomes very easy, because we don't always need to do the dividing. I am dividing by 100, but I can divide by 100 in my head. I know a lot of you can. So if you can find 10%, which I know a lot of you can, then you just divide it by 10 again to find 1%. It's very, very easy. So straight away, I've got everything that I need to do this. So I'm just going to quickly do a column addition just because I want to. So I've got 36, add 18. Oh, sorry, I don't need to do that, do I? I need to do something completely different. So I need to do 10% times 4. So I'm going to do 36 times 4. Get my ruler. So 36 times 4. 6 times 4 is 24. Carry the 2. 4 times 3 is 12. Add the 2 is 14. So I've got 144. So that's my 40%. I now need to find 6%. So I'm going to do 18, add 3.6. That's very easy. 18 add 3. In my head is 21. Add 0.6 is 21.6. So I know that 6%, make a note of it, is equal to 21.6. And now I'm going to need to add that and that together, because this is my 40%. And this is my 6%. So very simply, I'm going to do it. Just in my head, I'm just going to add. If you needed to, quickly make a note. Forget the 0.6, because that's just easy to add on. You might just do 144, add 21. Very simply, just so you can get it correct. Again, it takes me a little bit longer because I'm doing it on the screen. You could have had this added up by now. So that's 5, that's 6, that's 1, isn't it? And then you're going to add 0.6. So we've got 165.6. Very easy. And again, I'm making lots of jottings so you that can see that. But what I would have liked to have done is just continued doing this, quickly made a few mental additions, and I would have had the answer probably in about 15, 20 seconds. Very easy, just using mental arithmetic. But again, let's make a note. I think it was 165. Oh gosh, Andrew. 165.6, I think, was the answer from memory. So let's just go straight into it. We know that it's a percentages question, and this is the nice thing. We could just drop into autopilot with this and go long multiplication, division. Okay, so placeholder 0. So I'm going to do 360 multiplied by 46. Dead simple. 6 times 0 is 0. 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 3 is 18. Add the 3 is 21. 4 times 0. 4 times 6 is 24. 4 times 3 is 12. Add the 2 is 14. So again, I'm going to add those up. So I've got 0, I've got 6, I've got 5, I've got 6, and I've got 1. And again, if we look at these digits here, these align with these digits here. 1656, 1656. The only difference is this is 100 times bigger. So we need to now make it 100 times smaller, which is divided by 100. So again, I ran out of space last time. We'll probably get away with it. So we've got 1, 6, 5, 6, 0, decimal, decimal. Everything's going to move along 2 spaces. That means this 1 is going to be in this column. So we've got 1, 6, 5, 6, and there would be a 0 if there was another square. But again, it being on the end, it doesn't impact the answer. So we've got 165.6, which is the same as this number from just using the different strategies. So again, it's about which one you feel comfortable with and how you apply that into a SATs question. So this one is a good example. Again, this is a good example of going, right, which way do we jump off? Do we go into the finding all the different parts? And I wouldn't suggest that, because you're going to have to find, I'm going to use a bit of space above. You would have to find 90% and 9%, which means you would probably need to find 10%, and then times by 9. You then have to find 5%. You then have to find 1% and times that by 4, and then add them all together. So there's a lot of work to do. But the key bit here is understanding really that of the question, 200 in this question is 100% of the question, isn't it? It's 100% of the number that we're working with. So 99% is just 1% less. So really, and again, the same with the multiplication option. If you were going to do 99 times 200 and then divide by 100, there's a lot of work there. When really, to find 99%, which is just 1% less, we just need to find 1% and take it away. So it's dead easy. So if we get these 99% or 98%, we just need to find 1 or 2%. This is why it's useful. And then just take it away. So again, you would have 200, decimal, decimal, move everything along 2. So you know that 1% is equal to 2. And then all you're going to do is take 2 away from 200. So 200, take away 2, you know is 198. And that's the answer. So in this question, this is why I say having awareness of the question, I'm going to use yellow actually, having awareness of the question and what it's actually asking us to do. In some instances, we can just use our mental arithmetic to solve it. We don't. A lot of children, because they'd learned the long multiplication strategy, would have done a long multiplication, the 99 times 200, and then divided by 100. And yes, you'd have got the answer, but it probably would have took a minute. Whereas this, if you just go, 99%, that's just 1% less. I'll find 1%. Very quickly, that's 2. I can take 2 away in my head. There's the answer. You've probably done it in 10 seconds. Right? So look out for these 99% or 98%, because if it's 99%, you're just going to find 1% and take it away. If it's 98%, it's just 2% that you need to take away. So you would find 1% and double it, and then you would take that away. So very simple, but this is where the versatility of both strategies come in. Now, again, with this strategy, 28%. So again, I'm looking at that and thinking, right, really quickly, I need to find 20% and I need to find 8%, which is going to need me to find 5% and 1% and times it by 3. So again, in this instance, probably the long division strategy is long multiplication strategy is going to be quicker. So let's just do it. And again, with SATs, it's very much about not time for arguing over which strategy is better, because neither are better. Some are just more efficient depending on the question. And I don't have a preference. I'm not saying use either instead of the other. So we'd have 650 times 28, and then we're just going to get on and do it. I'm just going to make my pen slightly narrower just for this. So 8 times 0 is 0. 8 times 5 is 40. Carry the 4. 8 times 6 is 48. Add the 4 is going to be 52. Okay, then I've got my placeholder 0 because I'm multiplying by 10. 2 times 0 is 0. 5 times 2, or 2 times 5 is 10. Carry the 1. And then 2 times 6 is 12. Add the 1 is 13. So I'm now in a position where I can answer the question. I'm just going to make things a little bit larger again. So we've got 0, we've got 0, we've got 2, we've got 8, and we've got 1. And now we just need to divide by 100. So it's 1, 8, 2, 0, 0, decimal, decimal. Everything moves 2 places along. 0, 0. We've got nothing here. So essentially, the answer is this, is 182. So that just gets written in there, 182, and we would get the mark. And again, in that instance, I would suggest that is probably the most efficient way of doing it. So again, with this one, which strategy would you use? So 2% of 3,000. Now, in my head, finding 1% and doubling it is the easiest way to do it. But if you're stuck with doing long multiplication, you're going to go into a long multiplication, do 2 times 3,000, which I suppose technically isn't a long division because it's a 1-digit number. So I think a lot of kids would maybe come unstuck doing this, when really all we need to do is find 1%. So I would have 3,000. I'd move everything along. So I know that 3,000, so 1% is 30. So 2% is 60. That's the answer. So it's that simple. And this is what I mean. the problem is for some of you, if you'd have gone into autopilot and just went, oh, it's a percentage question, long multiplication, divide by 100, I've got a feeling quite a few of you would have ended up with the wrong answer somewhere. There's a lot of zeros in there. There's a lot of issues with layout. But it's remembering it's like 98%. It's like 98% and 99%. It's knowing that they're just minus 1% and minus 2% from 100%. And this is 100% in this instance. Whereas this one is just asking us to find 2%. So just find 1% and then times it by 2. That gives us 2%. So it's very, very easy. And when we got here and realized that 1% is 30, then it actually makes it quite ridiculous that that's even a SATs question, because it's so easy to do if you can find 1%. And here's another example of where we need to switch on. Because 51%, now absolutely, go into 51 times 900 and do that. But also is knowing that 50%, if we make a little note, here we need to find 50% and 1%. And 50% is just half, isn't it? Okay, so if you can half 900 and know that that's 450, well, I've got that straight away. And 1% is 9, isn't it? So the answer is 459. So very quickly, having that ability to be versatile with your percentages and know that that's 50%, and 50% is just half in a number, and I can find 1% very, very easily, then we can find 51% very quickly. Now, if you can't find 50%, then you're probably going to have to do the long multiplication strategy. But I guess what I'm saying is that this could have been solved very quickly, 459. Let's just do the other way, just to see that we get there. So you might say there's no reason to do this, Andrew, within the video, but just for the sake of it, let's just go through the process, because most of you would have went this way. So what have we got? 51 times 900. So we've got 1 times 0 is 0, 1 times 0 is 0, 1 times 9 is 9. 5 times 0, 5 times 0, 5 times 9 is 45. 0, 0, 9, 4, 5. Then we're going to divide that by 100. So we get to 459. And again, it hasn't took too long. I agree with that. It didn't take too long. But if you can just see 50% and 1% and you can work them both out and add them together, this way here is far more efficient than this way. But I also agree that then if we were to go and find 10% and times it by 5 and then find 1% and so on, this strategy would have been more efficient than this strategy. So again, there's lots of different ways to find the answer when it comes to arithmetic and percentages, and it's about using the knowledge and the skills that you already have. And again, this one, 36%, we can see this is sort of right. It's not a 10 and a 1, like 21%, where we can find that quite easily, or 51 or 98. This is right bang in the middle of like a tens number, like 36 or 74 or 18 or 47. So it's those numbers that really the long multiplication strategy is going to be the strategy that we want to use, because it's just the most efficient for time. All right. Because again, if we were going to use the first strategy that I'd referenced, you would need to find 10% and times it by 3. You would need to find 5% and 1% and add them together to get 6%. And then you would need to add the 6% to the 30%. So there's a lot of work in there. Or we could just use this strategy, which again, I'm not advocating for one or the other. I think it's important that you can do both. But let's just go through the process of how we could solve this SATs question. 6 times 0 is 0. 6 times 5 is 30. 6 times 4 is 24. Add the 3 is 27. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 5 is 15. Carry the 1. 3 times 4 is 12. Add the 1 is 13. So again, we're going to add that up. 7 add 5 is 12. That's going to be 6. And then we've got 1. So decimal, decimal. Everything moves 2 spaces along. 0, 0. So the answer is just 162 because we've got no decimal parts of the number. So it's just 0. So that doesn't really exist. There's no need for it now. So the answer is just 162. And again, going back to some of my original videos, once we've got the answer, even though you've got this answer here, 162, you must then transfer it into the answer box. It's important to reiterate that. If you don't put that in here, and if you had put 0.00, you would get the mark, because I know some of you will just do that. You would get the mark because it's still saying 162. But it's so important that you transfer your answer into the answer box. And that's this week's questions. So what I'm going to leave you with, as you can see, I'm going to leave you with some 1%, 2%, 3%, and 4%. So here, you're going to find your 1%, which is divided by 100, and then multiplying whatever you need to multiply by. So if you find 1% and you need to find 3%, then you would just find 1% times by 3. Then I've left you some examples of your 98%, your 99%, and 90% as well. I didn't cover that in the video, but 90% is just take away 10%, isn't it? So if you can see 90%, just find 10%. So 10% of 620 would be 62, and then just take it away. 620 take away 62. You'd need to do a column subtraction probably, but that's the quickest way to do that. Same as 99%. Find 1% and take it away. 98%. Find 2% and take it away. All right. So get into the habit of even 97%. That's just 3% less. So find 3% and take it away from 240. So practice that, because those question types do come up and they're dead easy to do. You don't need to do the long multiplication. And then these questions at the end, these are for you to decide which route to go. You're either going, so for 36%, you're either going to find 10% and 1% and go through the routine of finding 30% and 6% and adding it all up, or you're going to do your long multiplication and then divide by 100. So it's completely up to you. Whichever way you prefer, practice doing that, and you'll get the answer, okay? Because I quite like that strategy. I know in some previous videos we had some comments around why not just teach this way exactly, but it's a progression. We should know how to divide and find 10% and 1% and 5% and 20%, but we also should know that there is a quicker method of just multiplying and dividing, or dividing and multiplying. There's other ways to find it. We could divide by 100 first and then multiply. So there's lots of different ways to find percentages. But the key thing is, whichever way, my last thing to say, whichever way you prefer and whichever way you feel most confident, practice that with these questions, okay? So if you feel confident with the multiplication and division, practice that and then apply that into your practice SATs, and you will be very successful with percentages. So well done for getting this far in the video. Get the practice done and get those marks in the SATs. Complex percentages solved, hopefully. Now, as we've said in the video, these percentages are more complex and they will require one of two approaches. The first approach, using all those combinational parts of percentages, so finding 10%, 5%, and so on, 1%, and adding them up and multiplying to get there. Okay, so if you're confident using that approach and making lots of notes, then definitely do that. If you're just as confident using long multiplication and dividing by 1,000, then that's also an approach that we can absolutely use. And then we also need to look out, as we've said, for those non-obvious questions like a 99%. Do we actually need to find 99%, or can we just find 1% and take it away? So there's those situations as well. 51% is another example. Well, can we just find 1%, half 100%, and add the 1% on? So there's all those little combinations and situations that we need to be aware of. And that's what the test is testing, our versatility to not just stick rigidly to one strategy, but can we adapt and use our knowledge of number to solve these problems? And I know that you can do that. So thanks very much. As I keep asking, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. Please tell other people about the channel. There's a few weeks left until SATs, but lots of marks still to be gained from the videos of 16 weeks of SATs. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe and good luck with your SATs in a few weeks' time.